All right. Hi, Mallory. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
Yay! Oh, I'm so excited. And I have a pile of questions for you, but let's get started with your diagnosis story. So you were diagnosed in childhood, correct?
Yeah, I think maybe it's helpful to provide a little bit of background, I guess, about my family and sort of how this came to be. I don't know
Sure,
if that
yeah.
would be helpful.
Exactly. Yeah, go for it.
Um, so growing up, my so just about my parents a little bit, but my dad is still a practicing psychiatrist, and my mom was a special educator for over 30 years. So they were both very well versed, even though this was 20, 30 years ago. And the ADHD world is different now as we know it. But so having that knowledge and information, and then anyone who knows my dad, will say, "Oh my gosh, of course he has ADHD." He had a late diagnosis, an adult diagnosis at maybe 40 or something. So he was diagnosed, and then I had two older brothers who also were diagnosed. So I think just thinking, my parents thinking genetics are sort of playing in our favor, in that the likelihood, it's not definite, but the likelihood is that Mallory probably also does have ADHD.
That still feels like very forward thinking, even that alone, right? Thinking like my sons have it, so therefore it's likely my daughter has it. I feel like even that is very forward thinking.
For sure. And I think too, the ways in which I exhibited different characteristics or symptoms of ADHD were certainly different than how my brothers did. But I just still do this to some extent. It looks differently, hopefully, as an adult, but uh, had extreme and intense emotions. I mean, that was sort of something that I struggled with when I was younger. And I think that was something that, my parents had to sort of question. And I wonder, is this, quote unquote, typical of, an elementary age student, or is there something maybe else going on here that's, there's another layer of some things as well. Um, and I guess in a sort of in addition to that, um, kind of combing through, but I also got an anxiety diagnosis simultaneously, which was really hard to sort of distinguish between the comorbidity of that all. But I wonder, my child is having like racing thoughts and rumination, and that, might not feel super typical, or maybe, of course, all children have anxieties and worries, but this is sort of different than what other 8 year olds are exhibiting and dealing with. So it sort of brought up some questions and some thinking for my parents to go through.
Yeah, right. And I think, so many women who are seeking a diagnosis in adulthood are met with that comment from their physician, which is like, well, there's no evidence of struggle in your childhood, so therefore you got good grades, everything was fine, you were a good kid, and so you can't possibly have ADHD. And you're like, well, there's no evidence of struggle because I was so anxious that I was overcompensating with perfectionism and hiding it, and it's like, how do you even begin to unravel, like, where was I struggling in childhood? You had such a great example of your childhood anxiety when you, in the interview you did with Chad, was it? I think it was Chad last
Yeah.
summer, where you were talking about the perfectionism with homework, even in kindergarten. Can you tell me that story again?
Yeah, I mean, I love to talk about this, and it's funny. It's like, do I remember this, or is it a story that I've heard a million times and it becomes a memory? But I really do think I do sort of remember this. But in kindergarten, we get homework on Monday, and it's due on Friday, and just sort of the typical little packet of homework. And for me, that was not so. I hated that, because there were it was open ended, in the sense of, when are you going to do it, when you're going to get it all done. And for me, it's given to you on Monday, therefore it has to be completed by Monday before bed, or else I'm going to have a great sense of discomfort. And I will say, like, that's something that I'm trying to unlearn now as a 30-year-old, where I can't do all of my work in one day, and I certainly can't do it well, and it feels extremely uncomfortable to oh, I'm not going to respond to this email right now. I'm going to let it sit and sort of wait, and trying to use this experience to sort of work through that. But essentially, um, we had an A to Z book where, you have 26 letters, you have 4 days to sort of do it, to turn it in on Friday. And I just remember sitting up on the stairs, like leading up to my bedroom. I don't know why I was working there, but probably sprawled out. And I told my parents, like, I have to finish this. And they're saying, well, you have tomorrow and the next day and the next day as well. And we can chunk it out. We can do a few letters today, tomorrow. No, like, I hear what you're saying, but that's not a choice. And my brain, and this is still something that I do struggle with, I hear what you're saying, but that's not, the rational part of my brain is not able to conceptualize that being an option. It is a lot of the all or nothing. I have to get it done. I have to respond immediately because it feels worse to have something lingering. So I am sort of that person who has things on my to-do list, and if they're not checked off by, the end of the day, that feels so uncomfortable. But recognizing, oh, this is adulthood. There's always going to be a million things that are unchecked. So trying to understand, okay, that's okay. We deal with it. We understand, and you get through it. But within that experience alone, it was a lot of screaming, a lot of crying, a lot of cursing. I mean, looking back, I feel horrible for the way I treated my parents, and just like, using them as punching bags, because I think something that I've discovered as an adult is that I would get really angry with my parents, but it was me feeling upset with myself for not being able to break it down, or to not, whether it was something with math and I didn't understand it, so I would scream at my dad because he wasn't teaching it to me fast enough, even though he has a full-time job and like has to do stuff when he gets home. And helping me with my homework is not, yes, it is a priority, but there's a lot of other things um, going on as well. And I think that's something that certainly continued on even through high school, where feeling like, yes, it was a different maybe example, but it was still here's a lot of homework. Like, getting a syllabus or getting an assignment was so anxiety provoking because there's so many steps to do, and I didn't know how to break that down. It had to be broken down into one piece in one sitting, and it had to be today.
Oh my goodness, this is so relatable. Having one child who is the like overwhelmed by, both of my kids were diagnosed with ADHD and generalized anxiety at the same time. So I understand that idea of like, how do you begin to kind of really figure out which is which? But like, I have one kid who is the hopping from foot to foot, have to get this done immediately. Everything is urgent. I hate when things are, hovering above me. I got to get it done. And then the other one, so he's driven by anxiety. And then my daughter is like the procrastinator who leaves everything to the last minute. But I see that anxiety too, right? The anxiety of not doing, and the anxiety of the paralysis. And we have that struggle a lot right now with her. And she's in high school, and it's, this constant like, why aren't you reminding me of these things? Why aren't you telling me that I have to do these things? Versus, stop being so in my business. That like realizing that she's at that stage of her life where she wants she wants to be independent, but at the same time, like, it needs a lot of help and with structure. And like, that's what I'm looking into executive function coaching for both of them for different reasons. I want to get into that later, but beyond, I guess beyond, some of the stuff in your childhood with your parents, what are some of how was growing up with ADHD, I guess, in school, and what was your kind of history with education as a diagnosed kid?
Yeah, I think I think this is a great question. And I think, like, I sort of have not that any answer would be typical. We know that everyone is unique, of course, but I think that I wasn't the kid who was procrastinating. I wasn't the kid who was couldn't sit still and couldn't do this. And I think that it was almost like I'm trying to unlearn some of these things. And I had amazing teachers, but I would be I always got straight A's. I always did, strove for perfection. But the weird thing, and I'm sorry, my brain is like popping in with all the things, but the weird thing is, like, I, like, until recently, and I've like grappled with this, it's like I never really considered myself as being smart, despite like your teachers telling you like, this was so embarrassing. I remember in ninth grade, my teacher said in front of everyone, it was so embarrassing, but like, I wish every student was like Mallory. And like, that was so embarrassing. Or like teachers were praising, like, wow, you got it in so early. And I think that was almost like a falsely, like just a negative almost connection where it's, oh, the teachers are telling me because I did it so quickly, I did it so well, I should keep going along that way. And that was almost fueling the urgency um, within schooling. So that was something that I'm still trying to, I don't have homework, but I have other things that I need to complete. And, that it's the same idea when we think about, executive functioning, where we have to break things down and what's the priority and with life, not just schooling, of course. But thinking about school is, I loved school. I loved to learn. But, there was a lot of anxiety around like test taking and things like that. And it was just really weird in that it was just, this was all I knew. So I always got, like, of course, in elementary school, we didn't really have like extra time and stuff, but like, I didn't care that I sometimes would like go into a different room or would stay longer to do tests and things. Like, I appreciated that because it would give me anxiety to see people get up and turn their test in so quickly. And I was like, oh, I'm on page one. Like, I'm confused. And I think also like my middle brother and I went to the same middle school and high school, and we were 3 years apart. So like the fact that like he also would have extra time, it's just like, oh, and he was a cool kid. So it's like, I didn't really care that much. I was lucky in the fact that like that was normal for me because that's all it ever was. And then when I was in college, we're taking tests in like, a little trailer room. And I was like, okay, great. I can just take my test in private. I really don't care. I know some kids and people that I work with like really don't want to do that because it does feel alienating, but I appreciated that. And I would say like group projects were the worst thing of my life. That brought forth so much anxiety because I think part of like the ADHD and the anxiety is, if I'm not in control, it feels so awful if I don't know what's coming. So like working with others, and I'm moving at 500 miles per hour. Most, typical high school kids would, all right, we got something to do, we'll deal with it, we'll do this. And I'm, trying to gather the troops and do all this stuff. And I would rather just do it all myself. So I know it got done. And that was really challenging, I think, in school, of like learning to work with others because not everything I can just do on my own and tell other people what to do. So that was a big challenge in school. But I was lucky in the sense where I did love school. I had accommodations, used them as needed. And now looking back, I can certainly see, whoa, that was like, these were some like ADHD moments, or like like a lot of anxiety coming into this. Maybe that wasn't the healthiest way to approach this, or certainly that probably was not. And trying to use those experiences now to help me pave a different path, because I just, maybe we'll talk about this later, but, it will lead to burnout. It does lead to, this weird sort of needing kind of praise from other people instead of realizing I can praise myself. I can be proud of this, but I can't just rely on other people to tell me, hey, good job, perfect, this and that, because that doesn't always happen in adulthood. That doesn't happen in real life all the time. And we're always sort of seeking that dopamine and that praise. That can be really problematic with self-esteem. And that's sort of something I'm grappling with currently.
Yeah, I know, right? I feel like that topic comes up a lot, and we're trying to kind of figure out like where does the perfectionism come from? Does it come from having like being very bright and having a lot of high expectations of ourselves, but at the same time also feeling really, like you said, kind of out of control about our intellect? Like I will often, like, I loved learning. If I was interested in a subject, I was absolutely enthralled, but often that didn't guarantee that I would do well on a test, based on what the subject was. And so there was always this fear that like I'm secretly really dumb because I can't like show my intellect in a way that is acceptable. But then at the same time, we were often said things, many of us received those comments from our teachers, which is like, Mallory's really bright, or Katie's really bright, but, and then a list of some things that she could work on. And then as my personality, or maybe it's my neurodivergence, that's like all I focused on was what I wasn't doing. And so I would become obsessed with that perfectionism. And I was like, where is that coming from? Is that an ADHD thing? Is that an anxiety thing? Does everybody experience that? I don't know.
Yeah, no, I mean, I can completely relate to that. And I think like, when we were talking just earlier before the show, I think it's like thinking about like, yes, I was diagnosed as a child, but I'm still continually learning things about how my ADHD has evolved as I've evolved and how it displays in different ways. Um, and I think like I didn't have a name for perfectionism. Like I couldn't match the behavior with the feeling. And I didn't know that that is what it was. And I didn't even know that rejection sensitive dysphoria. I didn't even know what that was. And read something on Adhd. Like this was like maybe literally 2 years ago. And I was like, oh my goodness, that's me. That makes so much sense. Whoa, this is like a thing. And I have that thing. And recognizing like other people struggle with that. And I think like for me, it's been the biggest kind of thing with untangling perfectionism, RSD, and imposter syndrome. And I think like it was just so weird. Like my mom, we're joking, but like, my parents, I'm lucky. My parents are so supportive and like, people will say you're smart, but I think it's the comparison of maybe, but other people like the way that they speak. Wow, they're so articulate. And sometimes I have realized this a lot where I am talking and then get completely lost in my train of thought and have no idea what we were talking about or have another idea and, go on to a different, let me give you the whole backstory of the story that's not relevant, but I can't stop myself because I'm already here. Like that's my downfall. And it drives me nuts. It drives my husband nuts. It drives everyone nuts, but I can't stop doing it. And I think like, oh, I studied for 6 hours and got an A. This kid didn't study and still got like an A. And like that for me was like what was confusing on what is being smart. And, my mom would say, whoa, but this was the IQ and you got tested. I'm like, what? That would mean I'm like really smart. I don't understand because I don't feel smart because I feel like I'm doing all these things that other people aren't doing to prepare. But I will say that, yes, having ADHD is really hard and it is super frustrating sometimes. But I think that there are so many things that I've been able to learn that are beyond helpful for moving through adulthood when random challenges we're not expecting pop up. And that's something I just realized that is adulthood, but you can plan, but then all of these things pop up and realizing we are smart, we can figure this out, we can problem solve, can be really helpful. But I guess that was sort of a tangential thought. And for like thinking about sort of perfectionism and, I always thought that like other people had these expectations for me, but like I was lucky. My parents weren't like, you have to get straight A's. That wasn't a thing. That wasn't ever something that was said, but I didn't realize until recently, somewhere along the line, I just thought that's what it was. That was the expectation, but that really was my own expectation. And I don't know where that stemmed from. I don't know where that came from, but maybe insecurities of I need to protect that was sort of my coping mechanism of I need to protect these other fragile parts that are insecure, that are vulnerable. I didn't have those words to say, I feel vulnerable about blah or whatever when I was 8, but realizing that that's probably what it was, where I need to be the best at sports. I need to get the best grades because I can cover up the other things that I don't want people to see about me.
Mm. Yeah, oh God, it's so complicated and nuanced because that's the other thing. Like, I feel like my parents did everything right in terms of, if I wasn't getting straight A's, they were always very supportive and said, no, we don't expect you to get straight A's. We just want you to be happy and not everybody has to be, get 100%. But I also kind of look back at that and feel like I could have used a little more push, a little more prodding. And, because I was so disappointed in myself when I wasn't getting the A's. And so like you said, a lot of that was from internal and sort of feeling like they kind of gave up on me, and so now as a parent I look and I'm like, what is the best narrative around success? Because I want them to be proud of themselves, I want them to push themselves, I know how important that can be to your self-esteem in the long run, but I also I don't want them to burn out or feel like all I care about is the A, and I feel like it's a really delicate dance.
Yeah, for sure. I'm not a parent yet, but I just working with, parents and families and seeing, now I just have so much, I am so grateful for what my parents did. And just, it must be so hard to be a parent, especially with kids who have, ADHD, who have anxiety, who have, learning differences. And, I think a big part of it is when it's appropriate, like involving the kid in the conversation and what are their own goals for themselves, what do they want to do? And it's so important as a parent or as the adults to be honest and talk about when you've completely failed and fallen, flat on your face, and then what you did about it. I think, being careful with what we say, because kids will pick up on that when we're talking about ourselves as the adults, and just being conscious of that, because they're sponges and they're going to pick up on how sort of our body language, what we say, what we don't say. And also just like helping them understand that we can't do it all in one day, but we can be strategic with focusing on what are the priorities, what are we trying to achieve, and how are we going to get there. And I'm such a big advocate for helping kids understand, like asking for help is so necessary, because when you're an adult, some adults still don't realize that. And I find that to be a really unattractive trait when you think you can do it all on your own, because that just, whether it's narcissistic or pride or ego, I don't know what it is, but like, I've always been someone who's been comfortable, and I'm lucky in the sense where I will ask for help, because I think I'd rather not deal with the internal anxiety of, oh my gosh, I'm going to go home and not know what to do. I'd rather ask for help, even though I did feel really stupid a lot of the times, or sometimes I would force my best friend to ask the questions for me because she would do it, when I was just too scared to ask the teacher, but just like needing to ask for help. And I think for kids, that's so valuable, because we don't know what we don't know, but there's always someone out there who can help you. And if you don't say you need help, they might not know that. And I think just bringing that to light can be super helpful. But needless to say, parenting must be extremely challenging, but it's really helpful to have a lot of great resources out there of people talking more openly about their experiences, because I think probably 20 years ago, even, just there wasn't a lot of this dialogue about this. There was a much more of a stigma around all of these things, whether it's ADHD or anxiety or whatever. And it's no one's fault. It's not, nothing's to be at fault. It's just, this is how your brain is. This is how your nervous system is. How are we going to then help you be as successful as you want to be? And, and it's hard. It's a challenge, but it's doable.
Or at least like overcome that feeling like everybody else has it figured out but me, which I think is so common to so many of us with ADHD, that feeling like, when did, and I've said this so many times on the podcast, where I never even had heard the term executive functioning until I was diagnosed with ADHD and was kind of inducted into this world of neurodivergence. And I feel as though, there's so many things around executive functioning that are just life skills that I feel like I needed to be explicitly taught, as in high school, or even just in university, about adulting, right? Like, why are we not taught this in school in a very explicit way? Or is it just, as somebody, as with a neurodivergent brain, I feel like I need that explicitly, and everybody else seems to just be absorbing how to like come up with a budget and, stuff like that, or how to like figure out when, even just like essay writing and all of that time. So, I guess I want to backtrack a little bit, 'cause I know you have something to say, and I want you to let the thought get out. But like, I also want to just sort of backtrack and talk a little bit about like what even is executive functioning in terms of coaching versus, like, say, tutoring.
Yeah. So, I think my understanding is that tutoring is really helping, like, here are the things you're learning in class. Let's review them. Let's practice them through homework. And then, helping you sort of with that completion of, maybe there's a specific area where it's maybe a writing deficiency or something that is of a challenge. And I think when we talk about executive function skills, we're talking about a lot of things. We're talking about planning, we're talking about organizing, we're talking about self-monitoring, emotional regulation, and all of these things. And I think when we talk about executive function skills, it's here are the skills that we can apply, and they're transferable to anything we're going to do, and helping the person understand that here are the tools. And then also, it's so important to explicitly explain, how do you use the tools? Where do you use the tools? When do you use the tools? Because I think that's challenging. Like, when, back to the comment you said, in schools, like, here's the essay, go write it. And it, like, thinking about just a middle school example last year with a student I was working with, it drove me nuts, where here's, oh, there's no due date. We don't know when the due date is. We don't have a rubric. Here's like a prompt, and it's like sort of a loosey goosey thing. And I'm like, whoa, 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 this is giving me anxiety. So we need to like backtrack. When is the due date? So we can work backwards of, how do we break this up? What are the different pieces we need to do? It's not just write a draft and then hear the comments. It's, let's do a brain dump. Let's do some pre-writing. Let's do a graphic organizer. Let's break it into, here's the intro paragraph. How do we write an intro paragraph? I think a lot of the times in schools, we assume that kids can have these certain, understand how to do these certain skills. So with a lot of the executive function coaching, I find it, and some of the kids are like, oh, I know this. And that's great if they do. But a lot of the times we assume that they know how to write an essay. That's not always a skill that's explicitly taught. And why would the kid know how to do that if they haven't been taught that? When else are they writing 5-paragraph essays, And I think a big part of, executive function coaching is also helping them gain independence. Like, we want to be fired. Like, you don't want to be with me forever, but like, the goal is for you to do this on your own. And it's hard because we don't know when that path may end, or when you may be ready to veer off on your own. But it's a lot of scaffolding. And I love to do it where it's like, we do it together, and then you do it on your own. Because I think so much of it, time, it's, here's the explanation, go do it. And when we have, when our brain is not as mature, or is delayed in certain aspects in some of these executive function skills. So like, when we have ADHD, we're going to have a hard time with some or all of the executive function skills. That's just how it is. We assume, maybe as the adult, assume that the kid knows how to then transfer that. But we really can't make these assumptions, because then we're sort of almost telling them, don't ask for help, just, you're supposed to know it. And that feels really terrible as the young person of, why does everyone else know how to do it? I don't understand this, and I would remember like, working with, tutors, and I think a lot of the tutors I did, maybe it wasn't called executive function coaching, but a lot of it was like around writing. And a lot of it was sort of like thinking about how we're thinking and breaking things down, and how are we going to plan this? So a lot of it was sort of intertwined in that sense back in the day, like in middle school. But, I think it's appropriate to be explicit. And it's also okay to go, you have to go at the pace that the child or the young person needs, because there is no one size all fits approach. So I think it's, interesting when certain people come at executive function, like, here are the forms I'm going to use, here's this, it's all the same. And it's like, we have to get to know the person we're working with. What works for me doesn't necessarily work for you. So like, why would I try to force my method on you? It's really seeing, where are they? And then how do we actually meet them where they are? That's so important, because it's not about where should they be, with their chronological age, but it's where are they with their developmental age? And we have to meet them there, because that's where they are. And that's, they would if they could. Sometimes they can't access what they're trying to produce or do, just because of what's going on with their brain. And that's just how it is. And there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, that was a real light bulb moment for me around working memory too, which is, even if you've done this before, even if you've already written the 5-paragraph essay, it's still an assumption to think that you still know how to do it the next time around, right? That that you sometimes do need to have that scaffolding, like you said, that helps you to then reference constantly. Like, I remember months ago at the beginning of the summer, I had talked in an episode about the barbecue, and how every year at the beginning of the summer, I need to be retaught how to use the barbecue, even though I used it last summer. And even though it's very simple machinery, like, I just forget. And I, for a long time, was like, what's wrong with me? This is terrible. I was too embarrassed, and I was like, I would avoid it. And it was just that light bulb moment where I'm like, no, it's okay that I'm allowed to, like, forget how to do something and have to be retaught it, and I think that that's a lot, as a kid, that must be such a confusing concept, right? Which is like, I was taught this. And my son has that a lot of the time where he's afraid to ask teachers he's afraid to like advocate and ask teachers for clarification, because he's worried that the teacher may have already given that clarification in class before and he wasn't listening. And so he's so anxious about having to ask and then be reprimanded for asking again that he doesn't. And I'm like, oh, poor guy.
Yeah. And I think that's super common. And I, am thinking about a particular person, a young person who's, the first time is she has a real job and she's working. And we had this similar conversation to what you just mentioned about your son this week. And, she's dealing with all of these sciencey things in a lab, and, they tell her what it is once, but there are, 30 different systems that she has to be able to do. And not every day, what you're doing. So it's like, we can just say to our supervisor, like, hey, I know you've showed me this before, but like the way my brain works is I need to have you walk through it with me so I can physically do it. I can see it. I can touch it. And I think like her bosses don't understand ADHD. They're not going to assume like other people need these things. And I know it feels really uncomfortable to sort of put yourself out there and be like, listen, this is, my brain, this is what I need, but like, I want to be successful at my job. I want to get the raise. I want to do the right thing. But it also feels really scary to come up to them because I'm not seeing my coworkers have these same issues. So like, we can come up with our own workarounds, but we should also, feel comfortable. We should, but we don't always feel comfortable just with the culture of going up to the supervisor or the adults and asking for clarification, asking a question. And it's so important for the adults or the leader in that situation to practice empathy or even sympathy. If you don't know what it's like, you don't know, and that's okay. But to understand, if someone's brave enough to come to you or vulnerable enough to explain, I don't know what this is, or even just saying, oh, you might have explained this, I forgot it. Can you work through this with me? I really want to be able to understand it better so I can apply it, on the project or whatever it is. But that's so scary as a young person. But I think a lot of it is we build confidence by doing it, and we can talk about it so much, but we have to do it to really gain that confidence. And that's where it gets challenging of if we get an adverse reaction or a negative response from the person who's supposed to be supportive, like the adult, the teacher, or the boss or whatever, that shuts us down, that shrinks us. And that makes things much more convoluted and confusing when we're trying to advocate for our own selves and to help our brain sort of give our brain what it needs to be successful.
Yeah. And I think also like anxiety too is so wrapped up in that experiential learning, right? Like I know for myself, I have such elevated anxiety when it's not something I've experienced before. And once I've actually gone through the experience, and had that kind of firsthand relationship with whatever it is I'm feeling anxious about, it usually goes away. But like, how do you talk about that in abstract terms with a kid who is, holding back tears all day long or something?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think like the power that we possess as the adults being able to interact with younger people is like, especially if you have the lived experiences, it is helpful to share that. Like for me, it's like, I think it's so much anticipatory anxiety about everything that I do. So even like if I'm driving to a place I've never been before, oh my gosh, is there going to be parking? Is there going to be traffic? Am I going to be late? I should be 45 minutes early. Oh my gosh, what's going to happen? What if my car gets towed and I can't focus during the meeting? It's like all of these things. The likelihood is like 1% that that's going to happen. You might be late, but like, oh, well, that happens, and then after the fact, when I'm in it, it's okay. But even I need a lot of repetition because even though it's like thinking about a podcast, okay, I've done a few podcasts, but do I still get really anxious and nervous before? Sure. I feel very uncomfortable before, but it's like, oh, you're just talking about yourself. You know yourself better than anybody else. No one's going to tell you you're wrong about yourself, And I think when we're talking about like, how do we build up the confidence in younger people, and especially, obviously I don't just work with girls and women, but I think especially it is so important to, like, for me, part of the reason I do what I do and why I'm, trying to create all of these things that I feel are empowering is to be the person that I needed or that I wanted when I was younger. And like, I work with children, teens, and young adults, but I absolutely love working with young adults because it's nice to connect, and I can sort of, we can have these conversations and understand, like, I might have your same experience, but I get it. I get where you're coming from. Like, it drives me crazy when people say, just think happy thoughts, just be happy. It's like, we would if we could. You don't understand this brain if you're saying that. Like, that's insane. But like, helping people just like build up it's so much more than executive function skills or tutoring or coaching or whatever the entity is, but it's like helping the person see, I see you, I hear you, I understand you, I know where you're coming from, and we're going to get through this together. It doesn't have to be an on your own thing, because I'm going to be here. I can be so many different roles. I can be a coach, I can be a mentor, I can be a cheerleader, I can just be here where you are spitballing ideas or whatever it is. But helping, like, especially for young women, I think with ADHD too, it's like we're scared to talk about things that are challenging or flaws because we're trying to cover it up to overcompensate for other things. And we're allowed to make mistakes. We're allowed to own them. We should learn from them, but we shouldn't be held to a different standard than, than boys and men are, just because we are exhibiting different, characteristics or symptoms of ADHD or whatever it might be. But I think that we have so much power to help really empower other people. And especially, like, I love that, like, your podcast is, geared towards women with ADHD, because I think so much in the world, it's like women stepping on other women's backs to get ahead. And it's really like, let's build each other up, because there's enough work, there's enough air for everybody. We don't need to compete against each other. There's enough for everybody. So how can we help each other do that? And I think, just like, I really appreciate, having the opportunity to share, where I'm coming from, and share my thoughts. And I know that was a whole lot, but there was one other thing sort of related to that, is that sometimes I get really overwhelmed, like, listening to other podcasts or watching people's webinars, because they have like PhD, this and that. And it's like, have all these amazing credentials. And I feel other than sometimes to these people, even though, yeah, I do have, certain credentials or certain experiences. But part of, like, my approach to coaching and to just interacting and helping people is like, I'm just a regular person. I have similar lived experiences. Yeah, I do have education in, special education and executive function and things like that, but I'm just a regular person. And I think a lot of the times it's like, oh, Mallory, you've got it all figured out, you're helping other people. It's like, oh my gosh, I'm going to laugh out loud. I don't have it all figured out. You should see me at home. You should see, like, how supportive my husband is, and like how hard it is, like, as two people who have anxiety and I also have ADHD, like, that's a lot at home. But like, understanding, having someone who can understand you and build you up. But I don't have it figured out, and I'm the first to sort of, spill the beans of, I'm trying to figure this out. And I think a big part of it is, like, part of the reason why I love coaching is because I can help others learn, but I can also learn about myself from the work we do. And that's been really eye-opening, like, for understanding my ADHD and how it's evolved as I was diagnosed at 8 and I'm 30, and I don't have it figured out still. But I think that the more I understand and can sort of make sense of these little milestones or these experiences, helps me realize I am smart. I'm doing all of these amazing things. And yeah, I've done a lot of things that were failures or were mistakes, and that's okay, but that's how I'm going to learn from them. But it's been a really, empowering journey. And it's also been like, whoa, I'm at a way different, when I first started, I was like, whoa, that was really bad. That was a terrible session, and it's like a lot less of that, because we have these experiences. But, I just, for other people listening, I think it's helpful to just, like, I'm just a regular person who, has these insights to share. And I think it sometimes can be overwhelming when you assume everyone is this perfect person with all these degrees and knows how to do everything and has been doing this for a million years. But we're all just trying to figure it out. And I think being open about that can be really helpful and insightful for those around us who are, no matter where they are in their journey.
Yeah. Oh, I loved all of that. That was so good. And it's funny because I will sometimes get the one of the things I love about having these conversations is that I get to talk to women who from all different walks of life and from all over the place, and we all just talk about what hot messes we are. like and sometimes I will get that criticism, which is like, you have too many experts who are like winning at ADHD. Where are the real women who are really struggling? And I'm like, we're all struggling.
Right.
That's the point, right? Like you can be both things at once. You can be extraordinary and also need help. And that's what I love about Sari Solden talks about that, and Michelle Frank talked about that in their workbook, right? Like, you have permission to be extraordinary, but also require help. They are not mutually exclusive. And chances are the person who's saying, all of these women that you have on the podcast are so extraordinary, and like, chances are that woman is too. She's just only focusing on what a hot mess she is. and I'm like, let's like really embrace the fact that you can be both at the same time. But I think we are deprogrammed as women, I think we are programmed as women to feel like asking for help is failure, and that we wait until we are completely at wit's end until we welcome help. And I don't know if that's because of chronic overwhelm and the inability to articulate or what, but I do think that's something we really, really struggle with, which is, what does it say about me when I need help? As opposed to like, do you think Oprah gives a crap? Do you think Oprah's spending any time feeling bad about the fact that she's not folding her own laundry? No, she outsourced that long ago.
Exactly. And I think, like, when we think about, it's not just with kids, but like with adults too, but just having these, like, just be, yeah, like, I need help. I am like, these are the areas in which I need help. And I'm really good at this. I'm not great at this yet. I'm trying to get better at it, but we can't do anything alone. And I think that's where some of the culture is. It's, you have to grind, you have to grind, you have to grind. And it's, you wake up at 4 o'clock, you do all these things by yourself, and you're this entrepreneur. And it's like, maybe that works for some people, but like, that's not working for me, And I think understanding of, like, it's the same thing as a care team of, you have these different people on your care team of who can help you. Do you have a therapist? Do you have a psychiatrist? Do you have these people like who can help you become the better version that you want to be, that you can become? And I think that's so important to normalize that, like, especially as women, of just like, with and I'm glad that there's just a lot more conversation about mental health now, because it's so confusing and clearly not talked about, even 10 years ago. It was a way different, place to be. So just trying to like grapple with that and navigate through that, it is complicated, but just when you can be open and honest, I think you can help somebody else just here make a relation, even if you're never going to meet this person, that really is helpful, and hopefully something can resonate with them to realize, I'm not this crazy person. This is actually normal to have these struggles. Like, let's normalize that, because that is what life is. And if you're
Mm.
saying you don't have these struggles, then, well, you're lying. Like, I'll be straight up, like, that's not true. Like, everybody has struggles. If everything's easy for you, like, then you are the most, you're the only billionaire in the world, and there's nothing else. No, like, billionaires, they're entrepreneurs working like this crazy lifestyle of, you have to ask for help. You can't do it all by yourself. And I think that's just important to understand. We're not that different from each other in the sense that we all do need help.
Yeah. And it's something I struggle with a lot when it is asking for help, because I have a really hard time articulating what I need, what kind of help I need. And then also, I think I'm just, I have that perfectionism side where I'm like, oh, you know what? Rather than trying to explain to somebody else what help I need, I will just do it myself, especially as in my business, right? Where I'm like, oh, it's just easier to do it myself. It's just easier to do it myself. And then I'm like, oh, wait a minute, I'm burnt out. Why is that? And so I think it's like, even asking for help feels like a life skill that needs to be explicitly taught, right? Like, I don't know how to ask for help a lot of the time. It's not even just that I feel like I should do it myself. I have such a hard time letting go of things that I feel perfectionist about.
Yeah, and I wonder too about that, if that's like almost like something chained to your ankle, where it feels really heavy to have to meet these certain expectations. But It probably like taking it almost sort of symbolizes like taking a deep breath and then, just jumping off the diving board of it's really scary beforehand, but then you do it and it was okay. And sort of going through that process of, yeah, maybe I'm asking for help and it makes no sense, but then the person can ask follow-up questions, or you can, have some type of visual, or even like something I like to do is even create like a cheat sheet or something where ways in which I can ask for help, and then have some pre sort of arranged language for some of the people I work with, so that when this situation happens, oh, I remember like looking there on that chart, we have this. So making the connections between that of, oh, it's mostly I'm asking for clarification. It's going to save me time if I ask for help now, rather than doing it wrong the first time and then having to scrap it, do the whole thing again, and then feeling more shameful about myself at the end when it didn't work, than feeling maybe uncomfortable about asking for help up front. And I think that is like something that I really wish that I maybe had when I was younger, about like, here are different ways in which we can ask for help in different situations. And I just think that's it's such a powerful tool to add to the toolkit, for especially for young people and young women too, where we're not really taught how to do that. So why would we know how to ask for help? It's a weird sort of assumption that we're supposed to know how to do these things, but if we're not taught, how do we know?
Yeah. Rehearsing is super helpful. It's a really helpful skill, especially with like job interviews. Or I remember even my daughter when she was younger, we were like, the first time she wanted to call a boy in her classroom. I think this was like second or third grade, and I didn't even realize that that phone calls were like a learned skill. Like you don't just pick up the phone and know how to talk on the phone. And we had to like rehearse conversations so that she could kind of learn that skill of speaking on the phone. And it was so adorable because she was like little, but I do a lot of that rehearsing. And I think, I think it is a neurodivergent thing. If it's not an ADHD thing, maybe it's an autism thing. Because I was listening to the book Unmasking Autism by Devin Price recently, and they were talking about rehearsing in going, how it's very common to go to like a restaurant. If you're going to a restaurant, that like often neurodivergents will like look up the menu ahead of time, and so that they know exactly what to expect, and you look up the restaurant on a map, and so you know exactly where it is. And like you said, like you got to prepare where the parking is and the time and how long it's going to take you. And then they were also talking about if there's words that are not in your language, like, a French word or something, or a cheese that you don't know what it is. Like there's something on the menu and you don't know what the word is. We tend to like research it ahead of time so that we're not put on the spot. And I was like, I am being so called out right now. But realizing like how much we do that kind of rehearsing on our own before a lot of, stressful, anxious situations. I was like, it's really helpful.
Yeah, that's definitely a thing. And I was like, just on the menu thing, it's like I will look at the menu, but there are people talking, there's too much going on. So I'm looking at the menu, and then I'm like, unless I've been there a million times, I will look up, the food ahead of time, because it's like I'm looking at the menu, but it's like the same thing when I'm reading. I'm thinking about 800 other things, and I don't know what I'm going to get. Are you ready? I'm like, oh yes, I'm ready. But then I just will make pick something I don't actually want, and then I'm disappointed because it's like there's too much going on with that. So I think that is definitely a thing, and I can definitely relate to that as well.
Yeah, right. Gosh, I have so many more questions for you, but I want to be mindful of the time. One of the things I feel like it has been really interesting is medication for kids. For, as parents who are ambivalent about medication for their kids, I've found one of the things that was really interesting to me when I was watching the documentary Disruptors was, have you seen that
Yeah, it
documentary?
was
Yeah.
awesome.
It's so good. And I really liked how they kind of talked about the ambivalence around medication and the fear that parents have around, giving medication to children who still have developing brains versus how important the skills that medication provides in terms of self-esteem and confidence, those skills are crucial during brain development, right? And so
Yeah.
and I was like, oh yeah, that's such a good point. So I know you've said in the past that you did take medication through childhood. Is that something that you deal, or, I guess, do you recommend that? Do you talk to parents about that? Or if parents are concerned about it, what would you recommend?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great question. That's certainly a hot topic. And I think that this is actually something I was sort of talking about, like having a conversation, not specifically about medication, but there are certainly different stigmas around, different things that help us. So like glasses, okay, that's not a big deal. But like, for instance, like, oh, hearing aids, maybe that's a bigger deal. Like some people have like different stigmas around that. And I think medication is certainly different, but I think that like thinking about if there's something that can help you, it's not going to, like, I think, sometimes people think, oh, it's going to make my child a zombie or it's going to change who they are. But maybe if we sort of frame it in the fact that when we find the right medication, that's going to help them activate the person that they know they can be. And that's really helpful. So yeah, if they're becoming a zombie or if they're becoming, having a lot of adverse reactions, maybe that's not the right medication. And I think there was a child who at first couldn't find the right medication on that movie, on the documentary Disruptors, and then eventually did, and was night and day with the way he was progressing in school. And I am, maybe it's because I do come from a background where my dad is a psychiatrist, and that just was something that was normal for me growing up. But I'm a big believer in, if there's something that can help you that's safe and that's studied, obviously, then let's work together with people who have the intense hours of studying and knowledge in the medical field as part of our care team. And I think that's really important of, there's going to be risks and benefits to anything you do. It's, especially medical, of course. But I think thinking about the pros and cons, what outweighs what, and where is your child? And like, if there's something that could help you, I think as a parent, you would want to do anything in the world you could to make sure that you're helping them feel even an ounce better than they currently feel. And I think that's so important to take into consideration when you're thinking about that conversation topic.
Well, especially because so many neurodivergent children tend to be rejected by their peers, or they tend to be social outliers because they are too much or too weird,
Right.
or, like, I think that can be really a huge factor in terms of, what to deciding, weighing, it's not just about doing your homework and organization, but a lot of it does have to do with their confidence and their sense of self in such a crucial developmental time, right?
Absolutely, because it's not like, if they're like this as a child and we don't get sort of this help and make some changes to help them learn, maybe how to interact, how to do these things that they want to do, they're going to be like that. It doesn't just go away. So if we don't have, things that are helping them, they're going to then be the person in the workplace who doesn't know how to ask for help, who doesn't know how to set boundaries, and all of these things that are really hard, like adulty things that we're supposed to know how to do. And I think, not that medication helps specifically with that, setting boundaries or anything, but feeling, if we, emotion and cognition are so intertwined. So if we don't feel good about ourselves, we can't do good. We can't do anything that we're proud of. Like if we feel crappy, it's so hard then to have to be able to produce or to do well in school. But when we feel better about ourselves, everything, it doesn't mean anything's easy, but it's easier to navigate around in the world around us when we feel better.
Or even just that if you have a fundamental belief that you are extraordinary, that you are intelligent, as opposed to many of us who had a fundamental belief that we were stupid and faking it.
Right.
If you are able to kind of reframe your intellect, that alone then can give you confidence in certain situations in terms of advocacy or, approaching new things with a sense of confidence. It is kind of a domino effect in either direction.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Wow. Mallory, this was great. This was so fascinating. I really love talking with you. I really feel like I could go on for hours, but
Same.
But I do want to ask if you could rename ADHD to something else, would you? Or what are your thoughts on that acronym?
Yes, let me say, I wrote something down because I didn't want to forget what the idea I had, because that happens. So yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think I said attention driven by passion, because it's not that we are not able to pay attention, but if we're not interested, we're not going to be paying attention to it. And I think a big proponent and what I believe is it's strength based. So we have to pull from our strength. We have to pull from, let's use hyper focus to our advantage. Let's use our creativity, our passions, and to make everything interest driven. And it's sort of like finding the ways and structures that support your interest and passion. So it's like the how to support the what. I think is really helpful. So I think it's not a deficit. It's just, if we're interested, like we're going to be focused on things we're interested in. And I think that, is probably true for anybody. But especially people with ADHD. So I think that, a lot of people with ADHD are super passionate about certain things. So let's use that to our advantage to find workarounds to, yeah, we have to do things we don't like. I hate being inconvenienced, but we have to be inconvenienced at times. So how can we sort of transfer some of that attention to complete the less fun tasks?
Yeah. Well, and I think also this is something I work on a lot with my clients, which is that like passion and energy and focus, they're all cyclical. There's no, a lot of the time clients will come to me and be like, how can I harness my hyper focus all the time? And I'm like, that would kill you. So why don't you, allow hyper focus to happen when it does, but then at the same time also realize that you need rest and recharging, and that there are going to be days where you can't get off the couch because your energy is cyclical. But this idea that like how we often use hyperfocus as evidence that we should be like that all the time. I'm like, no, that's actually not the best way to approach life. But
definitely. And I think just being careful in the fact that what we think is productive, and it's perfectly fine. And we have to think about it like, on Monday, it might look like this. On Tuesday, it's going to look drastically different. And that's okay, because we can't be superwoman all the time. So some days we're going to be motivated, and some days, you can't teach motivation, but some days you have the energy to do this stuff. And some days all you do is get up and send an email, and maybe that's all you can do. Okay, well, you still got up, you survived the day, and that's perfectly fine. It might not feel great, but it just is part of life, and accepting that is part of the battle, I think.
Yeah, right. And the kind of I think that's also comes down to that whole perfectionist attitude, which is like, I need straight A's in everything. Now, I want to let people know where they can find you and work with you with executive function. So I know you work primarily with kids and teenagers. Do you work with adults too?
Yeah, so I work with young adults and regular adults too, not young adults, but older adults as well. And I really love that. So I've been in the executive function kind of world for 3 years, and I'm really excited to announce that sort of this year I'm launching Band Together Education, and it's sort of just a community that helps individuals with ADHD and learning differences reach their full potential by tapping into the unique strength. So the website is not yet up and running, but it will be this winter. But you can email me at info@bandtogethereducation.com. You can also find me on LinkedIn, just under Mallory Band, and also on Instagram at Mallory B_ADHD. And I just, post random things that I write and talk about and things I find interesting. So would love to connect with you. And just like you, I love to, if you're looking for services, awesome. But if you're looking for, someone to talk to or connect with, I think that's a really big part of it all too, of building a community where we can all have a place where we feel comfortable and confident to share our experiences. And I just want to thank you for allowing me to do so today.
Oh, wonderful. Oh, well, it's been such a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much. I'll have all those links in the show notes too. Don't worry. And yeah, right. I think it's just so important to find other people that you can be extraordinary with and also be a hot mess with.
Absolutely.
Well,
express. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Mallory.
Thank you.